The old clay pot had been waiting in Grandmother Mira's kitchen for 43 years, collecting dust and memories. She had inherited it from her mother, who had inherited it from hers. 3 generations of women had used it to cook the most precious meals of their lives, but never had it been tested like it would be on this particular December morning. When the first snowflake touched the red earth of Dharmapur village, everything changed. The children had never seen snow before. The elderly remembered stories their grandparents told about the legendary winter of 1847 when snow fell for 3 days straight. But this was different. This was real, happening now, and with it came an ancient tradition that would either unite the village or divide it forever. Hidden in the nearby forest, a rare Chingir bird had been spotted by young Arjun during his morning walk. The villagers knew the legends. Whoever could catch and cook the Chingir bird during the first snow would bring prosperity to the entire village for 7 years. But there was a catch. The bird could only be cooked in a clay pot that had been blessed by 3 generations, and it had to be prepared using methods passed down through oral tradition. Grandmother Mira held the only pot that met these requirements. The question was, would she risk everything she believed in for a chance to save her struggling village? The snow was falling faster now, and time was running out. The Chingir bird would only remain in the area until the snow stopped falling. This is the story of how one woman's decision changed an entire village forever, and how the simple act of cooking became the most important event in Dharmapur's history. The morning started like any other in Dharmapur village, with roosters crowing and the sound of water being drawn from the old well in the center of the village square. Grandmother Mira woke up before dawn, as she had for the past 60 years of her life. Her joints creaked as she moved around her small kitchen, preparing tea in the same metal pot she had used since her marriage to grandfather Ramesh 45 years ago. But something felt different today. The air was crisper than usual, carrying a strange scent that she couldn't quite identify. She stepped outside her small mud house and looked up at the sky. Dark gray clouds hung low, blocking out the usual bright morning sun that warmed the village every day. Mira had lived through many seasons in Dharmapur. She had seen the scorching summers when the village pond dried up completely, and the monsoons that sometimes lasted for weeks without a break. But she had never seen clouds quite like these. They looked heavy, pregnant with something unusual, something that made her feel both excited and nervous at the same time. Young Arjun was already awake, despite being only 12 years old. He was known throughout the village as the boy who never slept past sunrise. Every morning, he would take his father's old wooden stick and walk through the forest that bordered their village, looking for herbs and berries that his mother could use in her cooking. His father had died 3 years ago in an accident at the nearby construction site, leaving Arjun to help support his mother and 2 younger sisters. Today, Arjun felt drawn to venture deeper into the forest than usual. Something was calling him, though he couldn't explain what it was. He grabbed his stick and a small cloth bag for collecting anything useful he might find, and headed toward the thick grove of sal trees that marked the beginning of the deeper forest. The forest was unusually quiet today. Normally, Arjun would hear dozens of different bird calls, the chattering of monkeys, and the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. But today, everything seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As Arjun walked deeper into the forest, he noticed that the temperature was dropping steadily. This was strange because December in their region was typically mild, with temperatures that rarely dropped below comfortable levels. He pulled his thin cotton shirt closer to his body and continued walking. Back in the village, other people were starting to notice the unusual weather as well. Shopkeeper Ramji, who opened his small general store every day at exactly 7 in the morning, found himself shivering as he arranged the vegetables and grains that local farmers had brought to sell. He had never needed a sweater in December before, but today he went back in his house to fetch the woolen shawl that his wife had knitted for the rare cold evenings. Mrs. Kamala, who ran the village's only tea stall, noticed that her regular customers were arriving earlier than usual and staying longer. They seemed reluctant to leave the warmth of her small shop, where she kept a coal fire burning to heat the large pot of tea that simmered all day long. The customers were talking in hushed voices about the strange weather, sharing memories of stories their grandparents had told them about unusual winters in the past. Old teacher Sharma, who had been the village schoolmaster for 35 years, remembered reading something in his grandfather's diary about a winter many decades ago when something extraordinary had happened in their Mupur. He couldn't quite recall the details, but he had a vague memory of a story involving snow and a special bird. He decided he would look through his grandfather's papers that evening to see if he could find the diary entry. Meanwhile, Arjun continued his exploration of the forest. He had been walking for nearly an hour when he came to a small clearing that he had never seen before. In the center of the clearing stood a magnificent tree, much larger and older than any of the trees around it. Its trunk was so wide that it would take 4 people holding hands to encircle it, and its branches reached so high that Arjun had to crane his neck to see the top. But what caught Arjun's attention wasn't the tree itself. Perched on one of the lower branches was a bird unlike any he had ever seen. It was about the size of a peacock, but its feathers were the most beautiful combination of gold, silver, and deep blue that seemed to shimmer and change color as it moved. The bird's eyes were bright and intelligent, and when it looked down at Arjun, he felt as though it was studying him just as intently as he was studying it. Arjun had grown up listening to his grandmother's stories about mythical creatures that lived in the forest, but he had always assumed they were just tales meant to entertain children. Now, seeing this magnificent bird, he began to wonder if some of those stories might actually be true. The bird made a sound unlike any bird call Arjun had ever heard. It was musical, almost like someone playing a flute, but with an otherworldly quality that sent shivers down his spine. The bird looked at him for a few more moments, then spread its enormous wings and flew to a branch even higher up in the tree. As Arjun watched the bird, he noticed something else unusual. The air around him was getting colder by the minute, and he could see his breath forming small clouds in front of his face. This was definitely not normal weather for their region. Suddenly, something touched his cheek. It was cold and wet, and when he looked up, he saw tiny white flakes falling from the sky. At first, he thought they might be flower petals from some tree, but as more and more flakes fell, he realized what they were. Snow. Real snow was falling on Dharmapur village for the first time in living memory. Arjun had never seen snow except in pictures in his school textbooks. He caught some of the flakes on his hand and watched in wonder as they melted from the warmth of his skin. The beautiful bird in the tree seemed to be watching the snowfall as well, and Arjun had the strange feeling that somehow the bird's presence and the snow were connected. He knew he needed to get back to the village to tell everyone about the snow, but he was also reluctant to leave the magnificent bird. Something told him that this moment was important, that what was happening here in this clearing would somehow change everything for his village. As if sensing his thoughts, the bird spread its wings again and flew down to a branch much closer to where Arjun was standing. This time, Arjun could see every detail of its beautiful feathers and the intelligent expression in its bright eyes. The bird made its musical call again, then flew back up to its higher perch. Arjun understood that this was some kind of message, though he wasn't sure what it meant. He carefully memorized the location of the clearing and the tree, making mental notes about landmarks he could use to find his way back. Then, he turned and began running back toward the village as fast as he could. By the time Arjun reached the edge of the forest, the snow was falling much more heavily. The ground was already starting to show a thin white coating, and the rooftops of the village houses were beginning to look like they had been dusted with flour. The village was in complete chaos. Children were running around with their hands outstretched, trying to catch snowflakes. Adults were standing in their doorways, staring up at the sky in amazement. Some of the elderly villagers were crying, whether from joy or fear, Arjun couldn't tell. He ran straight to his house, where he found his mother standing in the courtyard with his two younger sisters, all of them staring up at the falling snow with expressions of wonder and confusion. "Manga," Arjun called out breathlessly. "You won't believe what I saw in the forest." His mother, Sunita, turned to look at him with worried eyes. "Arjun, where have you been? The snow started falling about 20 minutes ago, and I was worried about you being out there in this strange weather." "I saw a bird, Mama. The most beautiful bird I've ever seen. It was in a clearing deep in the forest, and I think it might be important. I think it might have something to do with the snow." Sunita looked at her son with concern. The stress of losing her husband and trying to raise 3 children on her own had made her practical and skeptical of anything that seemed too unusual or magical. "Arjun, birds don't make it snow. This is just strange weather. Maybe climate change, like Teacher Sharma talks about sometimes." But even as she said this, Sunita couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was happening. The snow was falling more heavily now, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. She had never experienced anything like this in her 32 years of life. Across the village, Grandmother Mira was having her own moment of recognition. As she watched the snow fall, memories began flooding back to her. Stories her own grandmother had told her when she was a small child, stories about a special winter that happened once in a generation, and about a bird that only appeared during such times. She went into her house and opened the old wooden chest where she kept her most precious possessions. Hidden under layers of silk saris and old photographs was a small, leather-bound notebook that had belonged to her grandmother. With trembling fingers, she opened it to the page she remembered from her childhood. The writing was faded, but she could still make out the words. "When the first snow falls on Dharmapur, the Chingir bird will appear in the sacred grove. Whoever can catch and properly cook this bird using the methods of our ancestors will bring 7 years of prosperity to the village. But beware, the bird is sacred and must be treated with the utmost respect. Only a clay pot blessed by 3 generations can be used for the cooking." Mira's heart began racing. She looked over at the old clay pot sitting in the corner of her kitchen, the same pot her grandmother had used, and her great-grandmother before that. If the story was true, then this snowfall wasn't just a weather anomaly. It was the beginning of something that could change the fate of their struggling village forever. But first, someone would have to find and catch the Chingir bird. And based on what young Arjun had just told his mother, it sounded like that part of the legend might already be coming true. Word spread quickly through Dharmapur about Arjun's discovery of the mysterious bird. By evening, the entire village had gathered in the community center, a large room built next to the old temple where important meetings were held. The snow continued to fall steadily outside, and the temperature had dropped so much that everyone was wearing every piece of warm clothing they owned. Village head Mohan Singh called a meeting to order. He was a tall, serious man in his 50s who had been elected to lead the village 5 years earlier. His face showed the strain of trying to manage a community that was struggling economically, with many young people leaving for the cities and the older residents finding it harder each year to make a living from farming and small businesses. Friends and neighbors, Mohan Singh began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. We are experiencing something that none of us has seen before in our lifetimes. The snow that is falling tonight is not normal for our region. I have contacted the weather office in the district headquarters, and they have no explanation for this unusual occurrence. An elderly man named Kishan raised his hand. Village head Sahib, my father used to tell stories about snow falling here many years ago. He said it was a sign of something important. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many of the older villagers nodded in agreement, sharing glances that suggested they remembered similar stories from their own childhoods. Teacher Sharma stood up, holding a yellowed piece of paper in his hands. I have found something in my grandfather's papers that I think everyone should hear. It is a record he kept of significant events in village history. The room fell silent as Teacher Sharma adjusted his glasses and began to read. December 15th, 1923. Snow fell on Nirmapur for the first time in 40 years. The old people said it was the return of the Chingir bird, a sacred creature that appears only during such unusual winters. According to legend, the bird brings with it the opportunity for great prosperity, but only if it is treated according to the ancient customs of our ancestors. A woman named Radha called out from the back of the room. But, Teacher Sahib, these are just old stories. How can we know if they are true? Before Teacher Sharma could answer, young Arjun stood up. Despite being one of the youngest people in the room, he spoke with a confidence that surprised everyone. I saw the bird today. It was exactly like the stories describe. Golden and silver feathers that change color in the light, and eyes that look intelligent, like it understands everything. It made it sound like music. Arjun's mother, Sunita, looked embarrassed. Please excuse my son. He has an active imagination, and the unusual weather has made everyone excited. But Grandmother Mira stood up slowly, her old joints protesting. The boy is telling the truth. I can see it in his eyes, and I have something to add to Teacher Sharma's reading. She opened her grandmother's notebook and read aloud. The Chingir bird can only be properly honored through cooking in a clay pot that has been used by 3 generations of the same family. The cooking must be done according to the old methods, with herbs and spices prepared in the traditional way. If this is done correctly during the time of the first snow, the bird's spirit will bless the village with 7 years of abundance. The room erupted in discussion. Some people were skeptical, calling it superstition and folklore. Others were intrigued by the possibility that ancient traditions might hold the key to improving their village's fortunes. The economic situation in Nirmapur had been difficult for several years, with crop yields declining due to changing weather patterns and young people leaving for better opportunities in the cities. Village head Mohan Singh raised his hand for silence. Even if we believe these stories, how would we catch such a bird? And who among us knows the traditional cooking methods that are mentioned in these old writings? Grandmother Mira looked around the room, her eyes settling on each face in turn. I am the only one here whose family has maintained the old clay pot for 3 generations. My great-grandmother taught my grandmother, who taught my mother, who taught me. I know the recipes and the methods. A man named Prakash, who owned one of the larger farms in the village, stood up. Respected grandmother, even if these stories are true, is it right to kill a sacred bird? You said yourself that it is special and magical. This question caused another wave of discussion. Many villagers were torn between their desire for prosperity and their respect for the natural world. In their culture, birds were often considered sacred, and killing one for any reason was not taken lightly. Grandmother Mira nodded thoughtfully. This is a question I've been asking myself all day. But according to the old writings, the Chingir bird comes to the village specifically for this purpose. It is not a killing, but a sacrifice that the bird makes willingly for the good of the community. The bird's spirit is believed to continue living in the prosperity it brings to the village. Old Kashan spoke up again. In my father's time, they used to say that the Chingir bird could not be caught by force or trickery. It would only come to someone with a pure heart who approached it with the right intentions. Young Arjun felt his heart racing. Something about the way the bird had looked at him in the forest made him feel that he was meant to be part of this story. But he was just a 12-year-old boy. How could he be expected to catch a magical bird? As if reading his thoughts, Grandmother Mira looked directly at him. Boy, you said the bird looked at you. Did it seem afraid? Arjun thought carefully before answering. No, grandmother. It seemed curious about me, like it was studying me. And when it flew to the lower branch, I felt like it was trying to tell me something. Then, tomorrow, you will come with me to the forest. We will find this bird together and see what it wants from us. Sunita immediately protested. Respected grandmother, I cannot let my son go into the forest in this weather. It's dangerous, and besides, he has school. Teacher Sharma cleared his throat. Actually, I was planning to close the school tomorrow anyway. This snow is unprecedented, and I don't think it's safe for children to be walking to school in these conditions. Village head Mohan Singh stood up again. I think we need to be very careful about this situation. We cannot risk anyone's safety based on old stories. But I also understand that this is an extraordinary situation that calls for consideration of all possibilities. He paused, looking around the room at the faces of his neighbors and friends. I propose this. Tomorrow morning, if the weather permits, a small group of us will accompany Grandmother Mira and young Arjun to the forest to investigate. We will see if this bird really exists and if it behaves as the stories describe. But we will not make any decisions about catching or cooking until we know more. Most of the villagers agreed with this compromise. It satisfied both the skeptics who wanted proof and the believers who felt they needed to explore the possibility that the legends were true. As the meeting broke up, people walked home through the falling snow, their minds full of questions and possibilities. The snow was now several inches deep, transforming the familiar village into something magical and strange. Children who had never seen snow before were still outside, building small snowmen and throwing snowballs, their laughter echoing through the quiet night. Grandmother Mira walked slowly back to her house, her mind racing with memories and preparations. If tomorrow brought what she expected, she would need to gather the traditional herbs and spices mentioned in her grandmother's recipes. Some of them were common, but others would be harder to find, especially in winter weather. She spent the evening going through her grandmother's notebook page by page, refreshing her memory about the specific steps involved in the traditional cooking process. The recipes were detailed, but written in an old style of language that was sometimes difficult to understand. She realized she would need to be very careful to follow every instruction exactly. Meanwhile, Arjun lay awake in his bed, listening to the sound of snow falling on the roof of their small house. He had never experienced anything like the silence that snow brought to the world. Usually, nights in the village were filled with the sounds of crickets, distant dogs barking, and the occasional motorcycle or truck passing on the road that connected their village to the main highway. Tonight, everything was muffled and peaceful, but Arjun's mind was anything but peaceful. He kept thinking about the beautiful bird in the forest and the way it had looked at him. He had the strong feeling that tomorrow would change his life in ways he couldn't yet understand. His mother came to check on him before going to bed herself. Arjun, are you sure about what you saw today? I don't want you to feel pressured to make up stories because the adults are excited about these old legends. Mama, I promise I'm telling the truth. The bird was real, and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I think it wants something from us, but I don't know what yet. Sunita looked at her young son with a mixture of pride and worry. Since his father's death, Arjun had been forced to grow up quickly, taking on responsibilities that should have belonged to an adult. Now he was being asked to play a role in something that might be very important for their entire community. Just promise me that you'll be careful tomorrow, and that you'll listen to Grandmother Mira and follow her instructions exactly. Y promise, Mama. I won't do anything dangerous. As Sunita tucked her son into bed, neither of them could have imagined how this simple promise would be tested in the days to come. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the forest, the Chingir bird waited on its branch, its bright eyes reflecting the starlight that managed to filter through the clouds. The village of Dharmapur slept fitfully that night, filled with dreams of snow and golden feathers and the possibility that their lives were about to change forever. Tomorrow would bring answers to some of their questions, but it would also bring new challenges that would test everything they believed about tradition, community, and the balance between the natural and supernatural worlds. Dawn broke gray and cold over their Mupwar village. The snow had stopped falling sometime during the night, leaving everything covered in a pristine white blanket nearly 6 inches deep. Children woke early and pressed their faces against windows, marveling at the transformed world outside their homes. Grandmother Mira was already awake, having slept little during the night. She had spent the dark hours preparing for what might come, gathering herbs from her personal stores and reviewing every detail of her grandmother's instructions. The old clay pot sat on her kitchen table, cleaned and ready, its surface worn smooth by decades of use. At precisely 7 in the morning, a small group gathered in the village square as planned. Besides Grandmother Mira and young Arjun, there was village head Mohan Singh, teacher Sharma, Arjun's mother Sunita, and 3 other respected villagers who had insisted on witnessing whatever was about to happen. The walk to the forest took longer than usual because of the snow. Everyone had to step carefully to avoid slipping, and the elderly Grandmother Mira needed assistance navigating the uneven ground. But her determination was evident in every step she took. This was something she had been preparing for her entire life, even if she hadn't known it until yesterday. Arjun led the group toward the clearing where he had seen the magnificent bird. He was nervous about whether he would be able to find the exact spot again, but as they walked deeper into the forest, he found that the landmarks he had memorized the day before were easy to spot, even covered with snow. The forest was eerily quiet. Their footsteps made soft, crunching sounds in the snow, but otherwise there was complete silence. No bird songs, no rustling of leaves, no sounds of small animals moving through the underbrush. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. When they reached the clearing, everyone stopped and stared in amazement. The great tree that Arjun had described stood exactly as he had said, massive and ancient, its snow-covered branches reaching toward the overcast sky like arms stretched in prayer. But there was no sign of the bird. Village head Mohan Singh looked around the clearing, then at Arjun with a mixture of sympathy and skepticism. "Are you sure this is the right place, son?" Arjun's heart sank. He had been so certain that the bird would be here, waiting for them. He looked up at every branch of the great tree, searching for any flash of gold or silver among the white snow and dark bark. Grandmother Mira placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, child. Sacred creatures appear when they are ready, not when we expect them to. We must show patience and respect." She walked to the base of the great tree and placed her hand on its trunk. Closing her eyes, she began to speak in a voice so soft that everyone had to strain to hear her words. "Great Spirit of the forest, we come here today not as hunters or conquerors, but as children of this land who seek your blessing. We have heard the ancient stories and felt the call of tradition. If it is your will that the Chingir bird should help our village, we ask for the wisdom to proceed with honor and gratitude." As she finished speaking, a sound drifted down from high above them. It was the same musical call that Arjun had heard the day before, like a flute being played by invisible hands. Everyone in the group looked up, searching the branches for the source of the sound. And then they saw it, high up in the tree, on a branch so thick it could have supported several people, sat the most magnificent bird any of them had ever seen. Its feathers seemed to glow with their own inner light, shifting between gold, silver, and deep blue as it moved. Even from a distance, they could see the intelligence in its bright eyes as it looked down at them. Teacher Sharma gasped audibly. "It's real. The legends are actually real." The bird made its musical call again, then spread its enormous wings and glided down to a lower branch, much closer to where the humans stood. Now they could see every detail of its beautiful plumage and the graceful way it moved. Grandmother Mira stepped forward. "Chingir bird, sacred messenger, we greet you with respect and humility. Our village has known hardship in recent years. Our young people leave for the cities because there are few opportunities here. Our crops struggle with unpredictable weather. We ask for your guidance and blessing." The bird tilted its head, studying her intently. Then it flew down to an even lower branch, close enough that they could hear the soft whisper of air through its feathers. Arjun felt drawn to step forward. Something about the bird's presence made him feel calm and confident, despite the awesome responsibility of the moment. "Beautiful bird, yesterday when I saw you, I felt like you were trying to tell me something. I'm here now with my community. What do you need from us?" The bird looked directly at Arjun for a long moment, then made a sound different from its musical call. This was softer, more conversational, almost like a response to his question. Then, something extraordinary happened. The bird spread its wings and flew down to the ground, landing just a few feet away from where Arjun stood. It folded its wings and sat calmly, looking at each member of the group in turn. Sunita moved protectively closer to her son, but Grandmother Mira gestured for everyone to remain still and quiet. The bird began to walk slowly around the clearing, its movements graceful and deliberate. As it walked, it occasionally stopped and made soft sounds as if it was speaking in a language they couldn't understand but somehow felt they should recognize. After completing its circle of the clearing, the bird returned to stand directly in front of Grandmother Mira. It looked up at her with what could only be described as expectation. Grandmother Mira's voice trembled with emotion as she spoke. "Sacred One, I understand that you are offering yourself for our village's benefit, but I must ask you to be certain. Once this path is chosen, there can be no turning back. Are you truly willing to make this sacrifice?" The bird made its musical call once more, then walked over to Arjun and gently touched his hand with its beak. The touch was warm despite the cold air, and Arjun felt a sense of peace and purpose flow through him. "It's saying yes," Arjun said quietly. "I can feel it. This is what it came here for." Village head Mohan Singh cleared his throat. "I never believed in magic before today. but what I'm seeing with my own eyes cannot be denied. If this sacred creature is truly willing to help our village, then we must treat its gift with the greatest possible respect and honor." Grandmother Mira nodded solemnly. The traditional way is for the bird to be caught by the youngest member of the community who has shown bravery and pure intentions. Arjun, the bird has chosen you. Are you prepared to accept this responsibility? Arjun looked at his mother, then at the magnificent bird that continued to stand calmly near him. "What do I need to do?" "You must approach the bird with gratitude in your heart and gently take it in your hands. If it truly accepts our village's need, it will not struggle or try to fly away." Arjun knelt down slowly, extending his hands toward the bird. "Beautiful Chingir bird, I am honored that you would trust me. I promise that your sacrifice will be remembered and celebrated in our village for generations to come." The bird stepped forward and allowed Arjun to gently lift it. Its body was warm and surprisingly light, and it settled calmly in his arms without any sign of fear or struggle. Tears streamed down Grandmother Mira's face as she witnessed this moment. This is how it was meant to be. The bird comes willingly as a gift to our community. Now we must return to the village and begin the sacred cooking process. The walk back to the village was somber and reverent. Word had spread quickly about the expedition to the forest, and nearly the entire population of Dharmapur had gathered in the village square to wait for their return. When they saw Arjun walking carefully with a magnificent bird in his arms, a collective gasp went up from the crowd. Some people fell to their knees in awe. Others wept openly at the sight of the legendary creature they had heard about in stories, but never believed they would see. Children pointed and whispered, and the elderly nodded knowingly, remembering similar stories from their own grandparents. Grandmother Mira raised her hand for attention. "Friends and neighbors, we have witnessed something miraculous today. The Chingir bird has come to us willingly, offering itself for our village's prosperity. We must now prepare for the sacred cooking ritual that will honor its sacrifice and bring blessing to our community." She turned to address the crowd more formally. "According to tradition, this ritual must be performed with the participation of the entire village. Everyone who wishes prosperity for our community must contribute something to the preparation. This can be herbs, spices, firewood, or simply your presence and good intentions." People immediately began offering what they could. Farmers brought vegetables and grains from their stores. The shopkeepers contributed spices and oil. Children offered to gather firewood. The elderly shared family recipes and cooking advice. A large area was cleared in the village square, and stones were arranged to create a cooking space that would accommodate Grandmother Mira's sacred clay pot. As the preparations continued, the bird remained calm in Arjun's arms, occasionally making soft musical sounds that seemed to approve of the activity around it. Teacher Sharma approached Grandmother Mira with a concerned expression. "Respected elder, I have been thinking about the responsibility we are taking on. If this ritual is successful and brings prosperity to our village as promised, how do we ensure that the benefits are shared fairly among everyone?" This was an important question that had not been fully discussed. Grandmother Mira considered it carefully before responding. The ancient texts speak of 7 years of abundance, but they do not specify exactly what form this abundance will take. It might be better crops, increased opportunities for trade, or the return of young people who have left for the cities. Whatever form it takes, the prosperity belongs to the entire community, not to any individual or family. Village head Mohan Singh stepped forward. I propose that we form a council to oversee the distribution of any benefits that come from this ritual. The council should include representatives from different age groups and economic levels in our village. The crowd agreed to this proposal, and arrangements were made to establish the council after the ritual was complete. As the afternoon wore on, the preparations for the cooking ritual became more elaborate and organized. Women who were known for their cooking skills shared advice about ingredients and techniques. Men gathered wood for the fire and arranged stones to create the most effective cooking setup. Throughout all of this activity, the Chingir bird remained peaceful and cooperative, as if it understood and approved of everything being done in its honor. As evening approached, Grandmother Mira announced that the actual cooking would begin at sunset, in accordance with the traditional timing specified in her grandmother's notes. The entire village would witness the sacred meal being prepared, and everyone would share in eating it when it was finished. The stage was set for a night that would either bring the greatest blessing in Dharmapur's history, or prove that sometimes the old stories are just stories after all. As the sun began to set behind the snow-covered hills surrounding Dharmapur village, the entire community gathered in the village square for the sacred cooking ritual. The fire had been built according to traditional specifications, with specific types of wood arranged in a pattern that Grandmother Mira remembered from her childhood observations of her own grandmother's cooking methods. The ancient clay pot sat ready, positioned over the fire at exactly the right height. 3 generations of women from Mira's family had cooked in this pot, and now it would fulfill its ultimate purpose. The surface of the pot gleamed in the firelight, its clay walls seasoned by decades of use and infused with the essence of countless family meals. Grandmother Mira had spent the afternoon preparing the traditional spices and herbs according to recipes that existed only in her memory and in the faded pages of her grandmother's notebook. Some ingredients were common: turmeric, coriander, cumin, but others were rare herbs that grew only in specific areas of the forest and were known for their spiritual properties rather than their culinary uses. Young Arjun still held the Chingir bird carefully in his arms. Throughout the day, the magnificent creature had remained calm and cooperative, occasionally making soft musical sounds that seemed to comfort not only Arjun but everyone who heard them. The bird's feathers continued to shimmer and change color in the varying light, creating an almost hypnotic effect that drew the attention of everyone present. Village head Mohan Singh called for order as the ceremony was about to begin. Friends and neighbors, we are about to witness something that has not happened in our village for many generations. We must approach this ritual with the utmost respect and reverence, understanding that we are participating in something sacred and ancient. Grandmother Mira stepped forward, carrying a clay bowl filled with the specially prepared spice mixture. According to our ancestral traditions, the Chingir bird must be honored through cooking that preserves its essential spirit while transforming its physical form into nourishment for our community. Every step of this process has spiritual significance and must be performed with careful attention to detail. She began by adding water to the clay pot, water that had been drawn from the village's oldest well and blessed by the village priest earlier in the day. As the water began to warm over the fire, she added specific herbs in a precise sequence, each addition accompanied by words of gratitude and reverence. The crowd watched in fascination as Grandmother Mira worked. Her movements were deliberate and graceful, clearly following a pattern she had memorized long ago. She added ingredients not just based on their flavor or nutritional value, but according to their symbolic meaning and spiritual properties. Teacher Sharma, who had brought his grandfather's diary to refer to during the ceremony, read aloud passages that described similar rituals from the past. The cooking of a Chingir bird is not merely the preparation of food, but a sacred transformation that connects the physical and spiritual worlds. The clay pot represents the earth, the fire represents the energy of the sun, the water represents the life force, and the spices represent the gifts of nature. When the preparation of the cooking liquid was complete, Grandmother Mira turned to address the bird directly. Speaking in a voice filled with emotion, she said, "Sacred Chingir bird, we thank you for the gift you are giving to our community. We promise that your sacrifice will be remembered and honored for generations to come. We ask that your spirit watch over our village and guide us toward prosperity and harmony." The bird made its musical call one final time, a sound so beautiful and haunting that several people in the crowd began to weep. Then it settled more deeply into Arjun's arms, as if preparing for what was to come. This was the moment that everyone had been anticipating and dreading. The actual sacrifice of a sacred bird was emotionally difficult, even though everyone understood its necessity according to the traditional ritual. Grandmother Mira had explained that the bird's death must be quick and painless, performed with a special knife that had been blessed and prepared specifically for this purpose. Arjun's mother, Sunita, stepped forward. "Grandmother, are you certain that this is the right thing to do? Even if the legends are true, taking the life of such a magnificent creature feels wrong to me." Several other villagers murmured in agreement. The emotional weight of the moment was affecting everyone, and some people were beginning to question whether the potential benefits justified the sacrifice they were about to make. But Grandmother Mira had anticipated this moment of doubt. "I understand everyone's feelings, and I share them. But we must remember that this bird came to us willingly, offering itself for our benefit. To refuse its gift now would be to dishonor its sacrifice and waste the opportunity it has provided." She paused, looking around at the faces of her neighbors and friends. Moreover, the traditional texts make clear that the bird's death is not truly an ending, but a transformation. Its spirit will live on in the prosperity it brings to our village, and its physical form will nourish our bodies and souls. Old Kishan, the elderly man who had remembered stories from his father's generation, spoke up. "In the old days, our ancestors understood that all life is connected. Taking the life of an animal for food was not considered wrong if it was done with gratitude and respect. This bird has offered itself to us. To refuse would be more disrespectful than to accept." The crowd debated for several more minutes, with some villagers arguing for proceeding with the ritual and others expressing continued doubts. Finally, village head Mohan Singh called for a formal vote. "All those in favor of proceeding with the traditional ritual, please raise your hands." A clear majority of the villagers raised their hands, though it was evident that even those who voted in favor were doing so with heavy hearts. "All those opposed to proceeding, please raise your hands." About 1/3 of the crowd raised their hands, including several families with young children who felt uncomfortable exposing their children to the sacrifice of the beautiful bird. Mohan Singh tallied the votes and announced the result. By a vote of 67 in favor and 31 opposed, the village has decided to proceed with the ritual. However, anyone who does not wish to witness the sacrifice itself may step away until that portion is complete. About half of those who had voted against the ritual chose to leave the square temporarily, along with most of the small children whose parents felt the sacrifice would be too traumatic for them to witness. Grandmother Mira nodded respectfully to those who remained. I appreciate everyone's thoughtful consideration of this decision. What we are about to do is not easy, but I believe it is right according to our traditions and the bird's own wishes. The actual sacrifice was performed quickly and humanely, exactly as Grandmother Mira had learned from her grandmother many years ago. The bird showed no signs of distress or struggle, remaining calm and peaceful until the very end. As soon as the bird's life ended, Grandmother Mira began the process of preparing it for cooking. This too followed traditional methods, with specific steps for cleaning and preparing the bird that were designed to honor its sacrifice while ensuring that the meat would be properly cooked and safe to eat. The preparation took nearly 2 hours, during which time the entire village waited in respectful silence. Some people prayed quietly, others shared memories of their ancestors and the stories they had been told about similar rituals in the past. When the prepared bird was finally added to the clay pot, something remarkable happened. The liquid in the pot, which had been simmering gently throughout the evening, began to emit an aroma unlike anything anyone had ever experienced. It was rich and complex, with notes that seemed to change and develop as the cooking progressed. More surprisingly, the liquid in the pot began to glow with a soft, golden light. At first, people thought it might be a reflection from the fire, but as they watched more carefully, they realized that the light was coming from within the pot itself. Teacher Sharma consulted his grandfather's diary and found a passage that described this phenomenon. When the sacred cooking is performed correctly, the pot will glow with the light of the Chingir bird's spirit. This is a sign that the ritual is succeeding and that the bird's blessing is being properly transferred to the community. The glow from the pot grew brighter as the cooking continued, casting a warm, golden light over the entire village square. Children who had been afraid earlier now approached the cooking area with wonder, and even the adults who had been skeptical found themselves amazed by what they were witnessing. As the night progressed, the aroma from the pot spread throughout the village, reaching every house and filling the air with a scent that made everyone feel hungry and hopeful at the same time. People who had been staying in their homes because of the cold weather came outside to experience the extraordinary atmosphere in the village square. Grandmother Mira monitored the cooking carefully, occasionally stirring the contents of the pot with a wooden spoon that had been carved specifically for this purpose. According to her grandmother's notes, the cooking process would take exactly 3 hours from the time the bird was added to the pot. During this waiting period, the villagers began to share stories and songs related to their ancestors and the traditions of their community. Old people remembered tales they hadn't thought about in years, and younger villagers heard family histories that had never been shared with them before. The snow that had fallen over the past 2 days began to take on a magical quality in the golden light from the cooking pot. Instead of seeming cold and forbidding, it now appeared warm and welcoming, transforming the familiar village into something that looked like a scene from an ancient fairy tale. As the 3 hours drew to a close, Grandmother Mira announced that the sacred meal was almost ready. According to tradition, every member of the community must partake of this meal in order for the blessing to be complete. The bird's sacrifice is meaningless unless its gift is shared by all. She began ladling the cooked bird and its rich, glowing broth into bowls that had been brought by villagers from their homes. Each person was to receive a portion, no matter how small, to ensure that everyone participated in the sacred meal. The moment of truth was about to arrive. After 2 days of extraordinary events, the village of Dharmapur was finally ready to discover whether the ancient legends were true and whether their faith and tradition would be rewarded with the prosperity they so desperately needed. The moment everyone had been waiting for had finally arrived. Grandmother Mira stood beside the glowing clay pot, holding the first bowl of the sacred meal. The aroma that rose from the pot was intoxicating, filling the entire village square with a scent that seemed to promise warmth, nourishment, and hope all at once. Before we begin eating, Grandmother Mira announced to the gathered crowd, "We must offer our final gratitude to the Chingir bird and to the spirits of our ancestors who preserved this knowledge for us. What we are about to share is not just food, but a sacred communion that connects us to generations past and to the prosperity that awaits us in the future." The entire village bowed their heads in a moment of silent reverence. Even the children seemed to understand the solemnity of the occasion, standing quietly beside their parents as the blessing was offered. Village head Mohan Singh was given the honor of taking the first taste as the elected representative of the community. As he lifted the bowl to his lips and took a small sip of the glowing broth, everyone watched his face intently for any sign of what he was experiencing. Mohan Singh's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with tears. "It's unlike anything I've ever tasted," he said in a voice filled with wonder. "The flavor is rich and complex, but more than that, I feel warmth spreading through my entire body. It's as if the bird's spirit is blessing me personally." Encouraged by this response, Grandmother Mira began serving the sacred meal to the rest of the villagers. Each person received a portion of the tender meat and the golden broth, along with some of the vegetables and herbs that had been cooked alongside the bird. As people began to eat, remarkable things started to happen. Old Mrs. Kamala, who had been suffering from arthritis that made it difficult for her to walk, found that the pain in her joints was completely gone. Farmer Ramji, who had been worried about his failing crops, felt a surge of energy and optimism that made him confident he could solve his agricultural problems. Young children who had been shy and uncertain became animated and talkative, sharing ideas and dreams they had never expressed before. Teenagers who had been planning to leave the village for the cities suddenly began talking about opportunities they could create right here in Dharmapur. But the most remarkable transformation was in Arjun himself. As he ate his portion of the sacred meal, he felt knowledge and understanding flowing into his mind. Suddenly, he could envision improvements that could be made to the village's agricultural methods, new crops that could be grown in their climate, and ways to create small businesses that would provide employment for young people. "Mama," he said excitedly to his mother Sunita, "I can see how we can make everything better. The bird spirit is showing me things, teaching me about the land, and how to work with it instead of against it." Sunita looked at her 12-year-old son with amazement. The words coming from his mouth were far more sophisticated than anything he had ever said before, and the ideas he was expressing showed an understanding of agriculture and economics that seemed impossible for someone his age. Teacher Sharma, who had been documenting everything in his notebook, found that his writing was flowing more easily than ever before. Ideas for improving the village school, new subjects that should be taught, and ways to connect the children's education to practical skills were filling his mind faster than he could write them down. As the evening continued and more people finished their portions of the sacred meal, it became clear that something extraordinary was indeed happening. The Chingir bird's blessing was not just a matter of good luck or positive thinking. It was a genuine transformation that was affecting every person who participated in the ritual. The golden glow from the clay pot had not dimmed even after all the food had been served. If anything, it seemed to be getting brighter, casting a warm light that made the snow-covered village look like something from a beautiful dream. Around midnight, As the last of the villagers finished eating their portions of the sacred meal, Grandmother Mira made an announcement that surprised everyone. Friends and neighbors, the sacred meal is now complete, but our responsibilities are just beginning. According to the ancient traditions, the clay pot that was used for this cooking must now be buried in a special place where it can continue to channel the bird's blessing for the full 7 years of prosperity. She pointed toward a small hill at the edge of the village, where an old shrine had stood for generations. The pot must be buried at the base of that shrine before dawn tomorrow. But it cannot be carried there by just one person. The entire community must participate in carrying it to its resting place. The villagers organized themselves into a ceremonial procession, with a glowing clay pot carried on a stretcher made from tree branches and surrounded by everyone who had participated in the ritual. As they walked through the snow-covered streets of their village toward the shrine, they sang traditional songs and shared stories about their hopes for the future. When they reached the shrine, a hole had already been dug in the partially frozen ground by a group of young men who had gone ahead to prepare the burial site. The clay pot was carefully lowered into the hole, still glowing with its mysterious golden light. As the last shovel of earth was placed over the buried pot, something magical happened. The golden glow didn't disappear, but instead seemed to spread into the ground around the shrine, creating a warm area where the snow began to melt despite the cold temperature. "The blessing is taking root," Grandmother Mira explained. "From this place, the Chingir bird's gift will spread throughout our village and our farmlands, bringing the prosperity that was promised." The villagers returned to their homes just as the first light of dawn was breaking over the hills. Everyone was exhausted from the long night of ceremony and ritual, but also filled with a sense of excitement and anticipation about what the coming days would bring. Over the next few weeks, the promised prosperity began to manifest in ways that amazed everyone in their Mapur. The unusual weather that had brought the snow also brought unusually fertile soil conditions that dramatically improved crop yields. Seeds that were planted in the affected areas grew faster and stronger than anyone had ever seen before. Young people who had been planning to leave the village for the cities began to see opportunities for creating successful businesses right in their Mapur. A group of teenagers started a small company making traditional crafts that they were able to sell to tourists who began visiting the village after word spread about the miraculous events that had taken place there. Arjun's newfound knowledge about agriculture and land management proved to be incredibly valuable. Working with the adult farmers, he helped them implement new techniques that increased their productivity and reduced their dependence on expensive fertilizers and pesticides. His insights seemed to come from a deep understanding of the natural world that went far beyond his 12 years of experience. Teacher Sharma used his enhanced teaching abilities to transform the village school into a model educational institution that attracted students from neighboring villages. The combination of traditional knowledge and modern learning techniques that he developed became so successful that education officials from the district headquarters came to study his methods. The village council that had been formed to oversee the distribution of benefits from the Chingir bird's blessing found that their job was easier than expected. The prosperity that came to their Mapur seemed to lift everyone together rather than benefiting some at the expense of others. New businesses were started, old ones became more profitable, and families that had been struggling financially found themselves able to provide better education and opportunities for their children. The village's reputation spread throughout the region, attracting visitors, investors, and new residents who wanted to be part of the remarkable transformation. But perhaps the most important change was in the spirit of the community itself. The shared experience of participating in the sacred ritual had created bonds between villagers that went deeper than mere neighborliness. People looked out for each other, shared resources willingly, and worked together to solve problems that had once seemed insurmountable. 7 months after the first snow fell on Dharmapur, village head Mohan Singh called a special meeting to discuss the changes that had taken place in their community. Friends and neighbors, he began, 6 months ago, our village was struggling with economic difficulties, young people leaving for the cities, and a general sense that our best days were behind us. Today, we are one of the most prosperous and thriving communities in the entire region. He gestured toward the packed meeting hall, which had been expanded twice to accommodate all the new residents and businesses that had come to Dharmapur. The blessing of the Chingir bird has exceeded our highest expectations. But we must not forget that this prosperity came through sacrifice, ritual, and the willingness of our entire community to embrace ancient wisdom. Grandmother Mira, now recognized as one of the most respected elders in the region, stood to address the crowd. The sacred clay pot continues to rest beneath our shrine, and its blessing will remain with us for the full 7 years that were promised. But we must remember that the bird's gift is not just about material prosperity. It is about reconnecting with our traditions, strengthening our community bonds, and remembering that we are part of something larger than ourselves. As the meeting concluded and people walked home through the streets of their transformed village, many looked up at the hills where snow occasionally still fell during the winter months. They remembered that magical night when the Chingir bird had offered itself for their benefit, and they felt grateful for the wisdom of their ancestors who had preserved the knowledge that made their prosperity possible. Young Arjun, now 13 and already recognized as one of the most promising young leaders in the region, often visited the shrine where the sacred clay pot was buried. Sometimes, especially on clear nights when the moon was full, he could still see a faint golden glow coming from the ground around the shrine, reminding him of the remarkable chain of events that had changed his life and the life of his entire community. The story of the first snow in Dharmapur village and the cooking of the Chingir bird in the sacred clay pot became a legend that was told throughout the region for generations to come. But for the people who had lived through those extraordinary days, it was not just a story, but a reminder that sometimes the old wisdom contains truths that modern life has forgotten, and that community, tradition, and faith can work together to create miracles that change everything forever.